Moving abroad now, with Britain sealing its exit from the European Union this week with the trade deal, all eyes are now on cargo flow between the United Kingdom and the EU member states once full traffic resumes at the end of the holiday period. Now, others, though, are watching if some EU members are likely to follow Britain's path and push to opt out of the bloc. A political movement calling itself Generation Frexit in France is calling for a French referendum on France's EU membership. But for more on this, I'm now joined by business journalist and CEO of Explain the Market, Guy Shone. Guy, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good to be here.
We'll talk about Brexit in just a moment, but first let's talk about this group in France pushing for President Emmanuel Macron to call for a referendum on the EU membership. What do we know of this campaign and just how serious is it?
Well, it's run by a gentleman called Monsieur Galloise. He's leading the pressure group now for some time, and he's putting pressure on President Emmanuel Macron using the Brexit trade deal agreement as a platform to push for a referendum in France. Now, Emmanuel Macron, of course, has long been a great supporter of the EU project, someone who is intrinsically linked in with the power structures across the EU. He's someone that obviously doesn't want to go down the road of a referendum. But the group, the Frexit group, are gathering pace on social media. They believe that there is an opportunity now for other countries to push to have their say on the EU. They've had some continuous problems, as we've seen in Britain, with the size of the budgetary contribution of their own country to the EU. But that's gathered pace recently with COVID, because many within that group have looked at the COVID recovery project that's now going on across the EU. And they've been alarmed, not just at the amount of money that's been passed from France to the EU to work on that project, but also the fact that that stitches them in to budgetary agreements going way beyond 2050. So I think part of this group's fervour, if you like, is motivated by the fact that they think that if they are ever going to have a chance of pushing for a referendum, it might only come now.
Yeah, and the UK's success in breaking free from the EU clearly demonstrates that this is by all means possible, yeah? And it is an option for other member states. So do you think this could appeal to some? And what could have possibly necessitated this group? Could it have been France's own issues, or could it have been the fact that, Britain has successfully pulled out of the bloc?
Yeah, there's always been support, interest within the big countries of the EU for the idea of breaking away from the EU. So although the majority of people right across the countries like France, Italy and others are broadly in favour of EU membership, if you look at the many polls that have been done on public opinion, then Italy generally tends to be the top of the list. They're the closest to the Brits when it comes to interest or support for the idea of breaking away from the EU. It's still, though, well under 50%, in the 40 to 45% range. Then when you look at France itself, even in the most recent polls, albeit with the problems and troubles that we've had, particularly with the COVID pandemic, the percentages there generally, again, don't get anywhere near 40%. They're 37, 38%. So the overwhelming majority of people in France, it seems, still are quite happy with EU membership. But there's no doubt there is support, it is significant, but it does seem to be still to be in the minority.
Are we likely to see a domino effect? I mean, is there another country that's more susceptible to exit the European project, and why?
Yeah, like I say, dissent in Italy has been probably at the closest level to the UK. There's still a very, very large gap between the uncomfortableness, if you like, that Britain has long felt with the idea of the EU and those other nations within it. So, there have been recent polls which present alternate views on where people in Britain would now vote if they had another chance to vote leave or remain. There are obviously all sorts of different views on both sides of the equation in the other big countries. France, around about 35 to 40% of people seem to have some appetite to look at the idea of EU membership again. It's slightly higher in Italy, and then the other bigger nations seem to be more supportive. But still, you're talking about the majority of people in France, the majority of people in Italy, still, it seems, are supportive of the idea of continuing to become an EU member.
Is the European Union in a much better shape now or vulnerable with the exit of Britain?
Well, I think there has always been a certain vulnerability when you're trying to bring together so many different countries, all of whom have their own elements that agree and disagree on multiple different subjects, then it's always going to be incredibly difficult to do. And the nature of doing that means that you're going to produce compromise solutions. Now, of course, there are all sorts of reasons culturally, politically, why in Britain, as well as support for the EU, there has also been a solid group of people who have never really felt that it's the right thing for Britain to do. Some of that is to do with the way that political organisation works in the UK. Proportionate representation, the ability to compromise, is much more of an inherent part of the business of politics in Europe than perhaps traditionally it has been in the UK. And there are many other cultural factors at play too. But there is certainly room for the politicians across the EU, for people in Brussels, to be a little bit concerned about what's happened. There are many who weren't expecting Boris Johnson to emerge from this situation with any semblance of success, with any positive story to tell at all. And there are significant minorities of people, as I say, in Italy and France, who would be amenable to the idea of a referendum. Now, at the moment, it seems like that would be unlikely, but it wouldn't take too many more crises for those 30, 35, 40% ratings to nudge closer to 50%. And then leaders like Macron, leaders like Merkel may have a trickier job on their hands.
You know, Guy, I'm reading a link that was posted on the website referendumfrexit.org, which warns that following Brexit, France's contribution to the European Union will increase by 5 billion euros a year to 29 billion euros, which is the equivalent of about 720 hospitals. And the website adds that the EU recovery plan from the coronavirus pandemic will bind France until 2058 and cost the country dearly. That's about 40 billion euros net. So is this reasonable? Is this assertion reasonable?
Well, this is one of those issues at the moment that Monsieur Gallois and the Frexit generation group is using as a springboard to revitalise their campaign. There are increasing payments going out, as is necessary, I guess, across the EU to fund this recovery plan. So one issue that they have is the amount of money going out, which is significant. The other, though, issue, which perhaps is the bigger part of the problem, is the fact that that contribution potentially could intertwine them in that plan for many years to come, going way beyond 2050, almost to 2060. Now, that is something that, again, they're using to gather support to say, well, look, you know, we think there is support out there in the country for a referendum. If we don't do something now, we're going to end up being stitched into these deals, to these agreements, for many, many decades to come. So I think there's a sense in which the pressure groups are looking at what's happened in the UK. They're looking at some of the emergency funding that's required and the projects that are long-term that are now going to help with COVID recovery. And their conclusion is that now is the time to push and protest and see if they can pressure leaders like Emmanuel Macron to try and take a different view on the idea of a referendum.
Let's now look at the practical implications of Brexit, particularly from the UK members. Is it getting clearer now with the trade deal secured? I mean, what will the future look like for Britain, for Northern Ireland, for Scotland going forward?
Well, look, if you take the politics aside, there are some positives. It is a big trade deal. Whichever way you look at it, it covers over £600 billion worth of trade. There has been some disruption. There's going to be further disruption. There's no possibility of changing a set of agreements on this scale without there being some disruption. We know that there were going to be changes anyway. There will be no freedom of movement, for example, between the EU and the UK. Now, the travel and trade that's done between the two entities is going to require just a little bit more paperwork, a little bit more effort in every single case. The points-based immigration system will be coming into the UK, which will apply to EU citizens as well. And of course, the UK contributions to the EU will now stop. So there's a huge amount of change. There's a lot that's been covered in this Brexit trade deal. Part of the problem, part of the criticism that Boris Johnson is now facing, not least from his predecessor Theresa May, is that there are some hugely important sectors that are not covered in the Brexit trade deal. The most obvious example being financial services, a huge contributory sector to the UK economy. That's something that May and others have criticised the Prime Minister about, and frankly suggested that the banks, the investment houses, all of those companies, not just involved in the trading and exchanging of money and investing in money, but also in the regulation of financial transactions. Those companies now, critics have said, are just going to be left to fend for themselves, to figure out each individual agreement between themselves. Now, there has been some planning in the financial services sector to accommodate for that. Nevertheless, there is still likely to be plenty of disruption ahead.
Yeah, and the fact that the deal does not remove any additional frictions between the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, will this perhaps not open a Pandora's box? Will this not create complications moving forward?
I think there are almost all areas of the deal have the possibility to create complications and tensions. Now, with the situation in Northern Ireland, that is something that I think all parties claim that they have been working very hard to try and make sure they do not upset. Nevertheless, that's going to continue to be a sensitive area, and lots of people are going to be watching to see all sorts of details on that. Goods that then travel from London through to Northern Ireland and then to the EU and back again. It's going to be very, very difficult to monitor all of those transactions effectively. Yeah. Certainly, on a political sense, it appears that agreement is now holding true. But part of the criticism, as I say, with this is that there has been a big deal done, but we're still waiting for much of that important detail. And some of that detail, as you said, potentially could be politically very, very tricky indeed.
And what is the implication of Brexit for emerging market economies like South Africa, for instance, that traditionally have strong ties with both the United Kingdom and the EU?
Well, I think the potential for trade with countries like South Africa, other African nations, countries all over the world is potentially reasonably good. Of course, it all depends on those individual agreements. The EU themselves, of course, though, are not going to be sitting idly by. They are also going to be upping their diplomacy, increasing their trade visits, and competing on that basis too. But certainly, job one is getting out of the COVID pandemic. Job two is providing a stable route to sustainable growth. Then we've got to look at how we integrate the green economy, look at productivity, and also trade with so many nations across the world. That's going to be a very, very complex and difficult job. However, there is some solidarity on this because so many countries across the world are struggling with the same issues. And there is potential, therefore, for countries to work together effectively. So there's potentially some positivity ahead, but the detail on the next phase of trade negotiations, that's the thing that we need to get right.
Guy Shone, the business journalist and CEO of Explain the Market, joining us via Zoom. Thank you so much for your time, Guy. We appreciate your time.